I want to welcome you back to Old Testament Survey. Right now, I have a very brief lecture for you called the Canonical Question. And the notes to this lecture can be found in a PowerPoint located in week 1 of the course. In this lecture, I'm going to talk about two terms, canon and criticism. Canon refers to the collection of books we know as the Bible. In this class, it refers specifically to the books of the Old Testament. Criticism refers to the academic study of Scripture with an emphasis upon sources, transmission, and historical accuracy of the literature. There are different kinds of criticism, and we'll cover a few of those in this lecture. Let me speak briefly about canonization. Canonization is the process of creating the biblical canon, and the biblical canon is a collection or a list of sacred books that are accepted as genuine. It comes from the term canon, which is a Greek term that means something like a measuring rod or a yardstick. Now, there are two terms you'll hear later in the course. Extra-canonical, that means books that are not in the canon, not accepted as canonical books. And then deuterocanonical books. Now, deuterocanonical literally means second canon, deuterocanonical. This is often referred to as the Apocrypha. These are books from the Greek translation of the Old Testament, but were not in the original Hebrew. Therefore, they did not make it into the Hebrew Bible, or what we call in this course, the Old Testament. However, these books, which we're going to study the last week of class, we're going to study a couple of them, still retain some moral value, and therefore churches and religious movements throughout the ages have used them. But they've treated them as being a secondary canon, not canonical in the same way, say, that Genesis or the Psalms or Joshua, Judges, and Ruth are canonical. Let's talk a little bit about the various forms of criticism. I have definitions of 3 forms of criticism in the PowerPoint. I'm not going to read those to you, but I included the idea of textual criticism, form criticism, and source criticism. There's also things such as historical criticism, redaction criticism, rhetorical criticism, all kinds of criticism. And criticism in this term is an academic concept that refers to the in-depth study of the Bible. Now, the problem with these various criticisms is that once you pull at one thread, it's hard not to pull at the other. And in the process of pulling all of these threads, you fail to take into consideration what the central meaning, what the central story of the biblical text is. And that leads us to this last form of criticism that we are going to utilize in this class, and that's canonical criticism. Throughout this course, it's beyond the scope of this course, and we won't have time to deal with textual criticism questions, historical form criticisms, etc. But canonical criticism is going to be very valuable to us throughout the course. Canonical criticism refers to the process of asking, why do we have the text in the final form that we have? Rather than exploring textual and source concerns, canonical criticism examines the text as we have it. And the key question, or what I like to call the canonical question, asks, why do we have the text of the Bible in the form that we have it? Canonical criticism assumes that we have a text, that is, we have the Bible. It's been given to us. It's been given to us either by God or the church or by some combination. Therefore, let's look at and study that in detail. That's really the thrust that we're going to take throughout this class. Now, here are a few forms of the canonical question that might be useful to you as you think about this entire concept. First off, why do we have the text in the final form that we have it? That's the canonical question. We could also ask, why did the writers of the Bible include this story or that story? Why do we have the story of Lot and his daughters in the Bible? I don't really have an answer to that one. Or the same way with the story of Jephthah in the book of Judges. Interesting story, fun story, but how does it apply to the rest of Scripture? That is asking the canonical question. We also will ask, why would the writers choose this word instead of that word? This is something that we won't get into in too much depth because we're not studying in the original language. but it is part of that bigger, larger canonical question. So why do we have the Bible the way that we have it? Let me give you two more examples of the canonical question that will come up in this course. The first one is this: why do we have two creation stories? You're going to deal with that this week, this first week of class. Genesis chapter 1 tells the creation story from one perspective, a 7-day perspective, God creating for 6 days and resting on the seventh. Then in Genesis chapter 2, we have the story of the creation of Adam and Eve and the Garden of Eden. It's a different creation story. I'm not suggesting that these are in any way contradictory to each other. However, they are different. And what do we do with two creation stories? Why did the Bible include the two of them? Now, the other one is the question of Manasseh, and this is going to be in the next to last week of the class. Manasseh was the most evil king that ruled over Israel, and he's responsible for the event that we know as the exile. 2 Kings depicts Manasseh in one way, and 2 Chronicles includes most of the information from 2 Kings, but it gives a completely different ending to the story of Manasseh's life. I think there's a reason why we have two different Manasseh stories, but asking that question is, in fact, the canonical question. Why do we have two stories? And what will be revealed when we ask the question of why we have two stories, two Manasseh stories? So the canonical question really can be an endless succession of why. And I think that's okay. Asking why of Scripture there's a long-standing tradition of asking why, and I encourage all of you to jump in and ask your own questions. Let me sum it up by saying this: we learn more from asking good questions than we do when we are simply given the answers. The canonical question, why do we have the Bible the way we have it, opens up new opportunities for learning and for personal growth. I encourage you to ask good questions of the Bible. It may not reveal all the answers that you want, but it will not leave you bored. And that is a promise.